May 7th, 2024, 6:47 a.m. Three unmarked patrol cars ease their way down Oakwood Drive in St. Clair County, Alabama. No lights, no sirens, just the quiet growl of engines breaking the early morning calm. Curtains shift. A jogger slows to a stop, sensing something is off. Officers in tactical vests step out, steady and deliberate. There's no rush. After 36 years, an extra minute won't change a thing. And the house they're approaching? It's not the sort of place anyone would expect. The lawn is trimmed, the porch is neat, an American flag moves gently in the breeze. Little garden gnomes stand guard along the walkway. A welcome friends mat sits right at the front door, the home of someone who probably gives neighbors peaches from his backyard tree. Someone who shows up with a casserole when a family has a rough week. A familiar face. Detective Marcus Haywood steps forward, warrant in hand. His jaw is tight, his eyes are focused. Behind him, 6 officers spread across the property. 1 circles to the back. 2 take positions on the sides. They aren't here for a conversation. Before they even knock, the door swings open. Tommy Brennan stands there, 62 years old in a faded crimson Alabama t-shirt, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. He looks like someone's warm, harmless grandpa, the kind who'd fix your mailbox without being asked. "Tommy Brennan," Detective Haywood says, his voice sharp in the cool morning air. "You're under arrest for the murders of Layla Wilson, Nora Scott, and Tessa Lewis." The handcuffs close with a metallic snap. Gasps rise from the neighbors gathering on sidewalks. Someone films. A woman shakes her head, whispering, "Not Tommy." There's no way. But here's the uncomfortable truth about monsters. They rarely look like monsters. They don't lurk in shadows with glowing eyes. More often they smile. They help. They blend in. They join the search party and hold a flashlight like everyone else. They hide behind trust, sometimes for decades. What kind of person can hide like that for 36 years? Apparently the kind who coached Little League on weekends, who volunteered at the fire station, who put a sympathetic hand on a grieving parent's shoulder and said, "We'll find her." I promise 3 young women, 3 devastated families, and 1 man who fooled an entire community. In 1988, 18-year-old Layla Wilson vanished outside Murphy's Diner, her car still running, door open, keys in the ignition. In 1990, 22-year-old Nora Scott disappeared from her family's ranch, leaving only her abandoned truck behind. And in 1995, 19-year-old Tessa Lewis was working the late shift at Peterson's gas station when security cameras captured her final moments, speaking with someone she clearly knew and trusted. For more than 30 years, their families lived with pain that never softened. Where were their daughters? Who took them? And why did it feel like the truth was always just out of reach? What no one realized was that the truth wasn't far away at all. It was right there, woven into the fabric of their own community. And when it finally came out, it shook St. Clair County to its very core. Before we go further into this story, do me a quick favor. Hit that subscribe button and tap the like. This case took decades to unravel, and you won't want to miss a single twist. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I love hearing from folks all over who care about justice and truth. Now let's turn back the clock. October 14th, 1988, St. Clair County, Alabama. If you've never been to rural Alabama, picture this: a place where everyone knows your name, your family, and half your business. Friday night football games are practically a community holiday. The local diner isn't just where you grab a bite, it's where you catch up on life. This is Bible Belt country. Folks wave at strangers. People leave their doors unlocked, and most still believe that terrible things happen somewhere else. That sense of safety was about to be tested. Layla Wilson was 18 that fall. She just graduated from Pell City High. Royal blue gown, proud smile, and a big hug for her parents as tears ran down their cheeks. She had plans: nursing school, maybe moving to Birmingham someday. She wanted a future where she could help people and build something meaningful. But dreams cost money, and Layla wasn't the type to wait around hoping life would magically fall into place. So she took a job at Murphy's Diner over on Highway 231, pouring coffee and serving biscuits and gravy to truckers, farmers and locals who'd been eating there since long before she was born. And she was good at it. Really good. Ela had that warm smile that made you feel welcome the moment you walked in. She remembered your order, even the picky ones, and she treated everyone like they mattered. Whether you were a regular or just passing through, her co-workers adored her. Customers asked for her by name, and her boss, Jerry Murphy, said hiring her was the best decision he'd ever made for the place. Ela had that rare mix of kindness and hard work that sticks with people. October 14, 1988, a Friday. Ela was on the evening shift, 3 p.m. to 9 p.m. It was a fairly typical night, steady but not overwhelming. She topped off coffee mugs, cleared tables, and listened to old Charlie Donovan's famously terrible jokes at the counter. Around 8:45, she started her usual closing routine. Wiped down tables, refilled the sugar, counted her tips for the night, $37.50. Not bad for a Friday shift in 1988. At 9:03 p.m., she officially clocked out. Sandra Hayes, her co-worker, was still finishing up in the kitchen. She watched Ela grab her purse, toss her apron into the laundry bin, and head for the door. "See you tomorrow, Sandra," Ela called, cheerful as always. "Drive safe, honey," Sandra replied. That was the last time anyone ever saw Layla Wilson alive. At 9:47 p.m., a customer pulling into the parking lot noticed something strange. A car, engine running, headlights on, driver's door wide open. Curious, he walked closer. It was a maroon 1985 Chevy Cavalier. The radio was still playing, Madonna's "Like a Prayer," crackling softly through the speakers. The keys were still in the ignition. A purse sat on the passenger seat. But there was no sign of the driver. The customer went inside and found Jerry at the register. "Hey," he said, "someone left their car running out there." Doors wide open, Jerry's stomach dropped. He knew that car. He'd watched Ela climb into it every night for years. He bolted outside, checked around the vehicle, peered into the back seat, and called her name into the darkness. Nothing. By 10:15 p.m., St. Clair County deputies were on the scene. By 10:30 p.m., Robert and Diane Wilson received the phone call every parent prays they'll never get. "Mr. Wilson," Deputy Clark said gently, "we need you to come down to Murphy's Diner. It's about your daughter." Robert's hands trembled as he asked, "Is she hurt? Was there an accident?" The pause on the other end felt endless. "Sir, we're not sure, but we need you here right away." 18 minutes later, the Wilsons arrived. Diane took one look at her daughter's car, door still open, interior light still glowing, and collapsed into her husband's arms, sobbing. "Where is she?" Robert demanded. "Where's my little girl?" No one had an answer. Within hours, the parking lot filled with volunteers, neighbors, church members, teachers from Isla's high school. People brought flashlights and spread out through the woods, calling her name until their voices turned hoarse. The sheriff's department launched a massive search. Bloodhounds picked up a scent trail from Ila's car to the edge of the highway. Then nothing. Helicopters scanned the woods at sunrise. Divers searched nearby ponds and streams. Still nothing. No struggle, no dropped belongings, no blood. It was as though Ila had simply disappeared. Detectives interviewed everyone, co-workers, customers from that night, friends, even her ex-boyfriend, who quickly produced a solid alibi and was cleared. They dusted her car for prints, but found dozens, friends, family, co-workers. Nothing that pointed to a suspect. The same troubling questions kept circling back. Why was her car still running? Why was the door open? If someone grabbed her, why didn't she scream? Murphy's Diner sat right off a busy highway, with people inside. Someone should have heard something. Unless Isla got into that car willingly. Unless she knew the person, trusted them. Detectives began putting together a list of regulars at Murphy's. People Ila would have felt comfortable chatting with in a dark parking lot. Folks who wouldn't have made her flinch or feel uneasy. And one name kept coming up again and again. Tommy Brennan. Tommy was a volunteer firefighter. Friendly, well-liked, the kind of man people waved to without thinking. He visited Murphy's 3, sometimes 4 times a week. Always sat in the same section. Always tipped well. Investigators spoke with him on October 17th. Ila, God, she was such a sweet kid, Tommy said, shaking his head slowly. I can't believe this happened. You guys need help searching? I'm happy to volunteer. And he seemed sincere, shaken even, worried. His alibi for the night of October 14th checked out too. He told detectives he'd been home watching TV with his wife. She confirmed it. So the detectives thanked him for his time and kept looking elsewhere. But by Thanksgiving, the leads were drying up. By Christmas, the search teams had quietly stopped meeting. And by spring, the case of Layla Wilson was tucked into a cold case drawer. One more unsolved heartbreak. But for Robert and Diane Wilson, time didn't move forward. It froze. Diane kept Isla's bedroom exactly as it had been. George Michael and Tom Cruise posters still clung to the walls. Nursing school brochures sat neatly on the desk. Her royal blue graduation tassel hung from the mirror like it was waiting for her to return. Every Friday night, Robert drove to Murphy's Diner and parked in the very spot where Illa's car had been found. He'd sit there staring into the tree line, hoping, begging, that somehow, some way, she'd walk back out of those woods and come home. She never did. Each October 14th, the Wilsons held candlelight vigils. They plastered missing person flyers across 3 counties. They called the sheriff's office month after month asking for updates. We just want to know what happened to our baby, Diane would plead, tears streaming down her cheeks. We just want to bring her home. But Illa wasn't coming home, and the man who took her was still out there. Still trusted, still blending in, still hiding in plain sight. And he wasn't done. 2 years later, he struck again. This time, the victim was taken from her own family's land. June 3rd, 1990. 2 years had passed since Illa's disappearance. The shock had faded. Life in St. Clair County looked normal again. On the surface, anyway. But not everyone had moved on. Some folks still locked their doors at night. Some mothers still called their daughters twice a day, just to hear their voices. The Wilson family's loss had left a deep scar, and scars may fade, but they never fully disappear. Most people believed lightning wouldn't strike twice, but sometimes it does. Nora Scott was 22, born and raised on her family's cattle ranch off County Road 24. If Isla represented small-town dreams, Nora represented small-town roots. She wasn't planning to leave St. Clair County. She loved the land, the rhythm of ranch life, the world her family had built over 3 generations. The Scott Ranch was about 140 acres of pasture, woods, and rolling hills. Not enormous, but it was theirs. James Scott had inherited it from his father, and Nora grew up in the heart of it, riding horses, mending fences, bottle-feeding calves in the spring. She could handle a tractor long before she got her driver's license. Nora was tough and sun-kissed, wearing her blonde hair in a ponytail and her boots even to church. She didn't need makeup or fancy clothes. She knew exactly who she was, and she was in love. His name was Derek Pullman. They'd been together since their sophomore year of high school. Derek worked construction during the week and helped out on the ranch most weekends. On May 12, 1990, just 3 weeks before Nora disappeared, Derek got down on one knee in the middle of a hayfield and proposed with his grandmother's ring. Nora said yes before he even finished asking. They picked the date, October 20th, 1990. An outdoor fall wedding under the oak trees beside the pond. Nora had already chosen her dress, a simple white gown with lace sleeves hanging in her childhood closet. Everything in her life was falling into place. June 3rd started like any other Sunday. Nora woke up at 6:15 a.m., pulled on a pair of jeans and a faded Leonard Sky Nerd t-shirt, and headed out to feed the cattle. Her father was already in the barn, checking on a cow that had been limping the day before. "Morning, Daddy," Nora called as she grabbed a bale of hay. "Morning, baby girl. You sleep all right?" Like a rock. They fell into their usual rhythm, working side by side in comfortable silence for the next 2 hours. This was their bond. This was their life. Around 9 a.m., Nora headed back to the house for breakfast. Her mother, Linda Scott, had made pancakes and bacon. Derek stopped by around 10:30, and the 3 of them sat on the porch, sipping sweet tea and talking wedding plans. It was one of those peaceful Alabama mornings that felt like it could stretch on forever. By 1 p.m., Derek had to leave for his brother's birthday barbecue across town. He kissed Nora goodbye. "See you tonight?" he asked. Absolutely. I'll be done by 6. He didn't know it, but that would be the last time he ever saw his fiancée alive. Around 2:30 p.m., Nora told her parents she was going to check the fence line on the eastern pasture. Some of the cattle had been wandering too close to Old Mill Access Road, and her father wanted to make sure the wire wasn't down. "Take the truck," James said. "That road's rough." Nora grabbed the keys to the family's red 1987 Ford F-150, the one with the dented tailgate and the big metal toolbox bolted in the back. She whistled for Rusty, their 3-year-old Australian shepherd. He bounded into the truck bed, tail wagging hard. "Be back in an hour," Nora called. Linda waved from the kitchen window. "Be careful, honey." 1 hour passed, then 2. By 5 o'clock, James Scott felt uneasy. By 5:30, his worry was turning into fear. By 6 p.m., he couldn't take it anymore. He got in his own truck and headed down Old Mill Access Road to look for her. At 6:14 p.m., he found the red Ford parked on the shoulder of the dirt road, about 1.5 miles from the house. The engine was off. The keys were still in the ignition. The driver's door was closed, unlike Layla Wilson's car 2 years earlier, but unlocked. And in the truck bed, pacing and whining, was Rusty. Rusty adored Nora. He followed her everywhere. If she went into the woods, he went right behind her. If she walked a mile down the road, he'd walk a mile down the road. Rusty wouldn't have stayed in the truck unless something happened too quickly for him to react. Unless someone took her before she could even call for him. James shouted her name across the empty pasture. "Nora! Nora!" Silence. He ran into the tree line, searching the fence, checking the ditches. He rushed back to the truck and leaned on the horn again and again, praying she'd hear it and come running. She didn't. At 6:42 p.m., James called the St. Clair County Sheriff's Department. "My daughter's missing. Her truck's out here on Old Mill Access Road, but she's gone. You need to send someone now." The dispatcher recognized the address, the Scott Ranch. She remembered another missing young woman. "Sir, we're sending units right away." "Please stay where you are within 30 minutes. Some of the same deputies who had searched for Layla Wilson 2 years earlier were back in the field, flashlights cutting through the fading daylight. At 7:10 p.m., Derek got the call. He left his brother's barbecue, driving nearly 90 miles an hour to get to the ranch. When he saw the red Ford sitting empty on that dirt road, he dropped to his knees and screamed. The search went on all night. Bloodhounds picked up Nora's scent at the truck, followed it about 15 feet down the road, and then it simply vanished, as if she'd been lifted right off the ground. No footprints into the woods, no drag marks, no torn clothing, no blood, nothing. Helicopters flew grid patterns at sunrise. Volunteers from 5 counties came out, forming long search lines and combing every inch of the ranch. They found absolutely nothing. By the 3rd day, investigators were facing the possibility they'd been dreading. This wasn't a coincidence. 2 young women, 2 disappearances, same county, same lack of evidence, same impossible vanishing act. A task force was formed. FBI agents rolled in from Birmingham, and before long, federal profilers were sketching out theories. Was there really a serial predator stalking St. Clair County? The connection to Layla Wilson was obvious, almost too obvious, but it still didn't form a clean pattern. The 2 young women vanished from completely different environments. Layla disappeared in a public parking lot. Nora vanished on a remote ranch road without anyone in sight. But the way they disappeared, now that was identical. No struggle, no witnesses, no screams. Just gone. Detectives went back through every name from Layla's case. Naturally, that included Tommy Brennan. When investigators knocked on his door, Tommy stepped out and shook his head immediately. "Jesus, not again," he muttered. "I heard about that Scott girl. This is awful. You think it's the same guy?" "We're exploring all possibilities," the detective said. "Where were you Sunday afternoon, June 3rd? "At home," Tommy replied. "Did some yard work. Watched the Braves game. My wife was with me," and once again, his wife confirmed it. And once again, Tommy looked genuinely shaken. He wasn't nervous. He was heartbroken. So investigators cleared him. Again, Tommy Brennan, after all, was the picture of a good neighbor, volunteer firefighter, Little League coach. The guy who helped everyone move a couch or jumpstart a dead battery. The real predator, they figured, had to be someone else. Someone with darkness hiding just under the surface. By mid-July, the case stalled. By August, the media coverage died down. By September, Nora Scott's name slipped into the same cold case drawer as Layla's. The wedding Nora and Derek planned for October 20th never happened. Instead, Derek stood alone in the hayfield where he'd proposed. Just stood there and cried until he couldn't anymore. Nora's dress still hung untouched in her closet, wrapped neatly in plastic. Her mother, Linda, couldn't bring herself to take it down. The fear in St. Clair County was thick enough to taste. Parents stopped letting their daughters go anywhere alone. Teens traveled in packs. Pepper spray sold out at every hardware store. Locksmiths stayed booked solid for weeks. Sheriff Bill Caddick even hosted a town hall in late June, trying to calm folks down. "We are doing everything in our power to find whoever is responsible," he said. "We will not rest until we have answers." But deep down, people knew the truth. How do you catch someone who leaves no trace? How do you find a ghost? Quick pause. If you're hooked on this case, drop your theories in the comments. Who do you think could be behind these disappearances? And let me know what time it is where you're watching from. I always love hearing from you. As the years passed, both families, Nora's and Layla's, held vigils. They became close, bonded by a kind of grief that only the two of them could truly understand. They pushed the sheriff's office for updates, begged for new angles, refused to let their daughters' names fade away. But inside they knew. Layla and Nora weren't coming home. Somewhere out there, the man who took them was still living his life like nothing ever happened, going to work, waving to neighbors, sleeping soundly at night. He'd gotten away with it, twice. 5 years passed. The county healed, at least on the surface. People exhaled. The sharp fear dulled to a quiet, uneasy buzz. Life moved on. Babies were born, new families moved in, and younger residents barely even knew the stories. And then, 5 full years after Nora vanished, he struck again. A muggy Tuesday night. The air felt thick, like the whole county was holding its breath. Tessa Lewis was 19 years old. She grew up in Moody, just south of the St. Clair County line, but had moved to Pell City after high school to work and save money. Tessa had big dreams. She wanted to study graphic design at the University of Alabama. Tessa had a portfolio packed with hand-drawn logos and digital artwork she'd created on her old secondhand computer. She wasn't just talented, she was determined. Her future was so bright you could almost picture it glowing around her. But college cost money, and Tessa's family didn't have much to spare. Her father passed away from a heart attack when she was 15, and her mother, Sharon, worked double shifts as a nurse's aide just to keep the bills paid. Tessa's little sister, Amy, was only 12. Braces, school supplies, shoes that needed replacing every few months. Life piled up fast. So Tessa did what so many young people in small towns do. She rolled up her sleeves and got to work. Peterson's gas station sat on the corner of Highway 231 and Cogswell Avenue, about 3 miles outside of downtown Pell City. It wasn't anything fancy. A small convenience store, 6 pumps, a couple of air machines, and a neon sign that buzzed like it had a grudge. But it stayed open 24 hours a day, which meant plenty of shifts. And Bill Peterson, the owner, was a decent man. Fair, steady, always paid on time. Tessa had been there 8 months, usually taking the night shift from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. The extra $1.50 an hour mattered. She didn't mind those late hours either. The quiet gave her time to sketch between customers, time to imagine the life she was building one small paycheck at a time. Everyone liked her. Her coworkers, her regulars, even the tired truckers passing through. She had a way of making people feel noticed. Even during a bleary-eyed 2 a.m. purchase, she'd smile, remember your name, ask about your kids, maybe even tip you off to her favorite candy bar. "That girl's got a light in her," Bill Peterson often said. "She's going places." August 22nd, 1995 was a Tuesday night. Tessa clocked in at 9:58 p.m. 2 minutes early, just like always. Carlos Mendez, who worked the evening shift, gave her the usual rundown. Register balanced, coffee fresh, beer delivery stocked in the cooler. "Quiet night," he told her as he grabbed his keys. "Maybe a dozen customers since 6. You should be good." "Thanks, Carlos." "Drive safe." You too, Tessa. See you tomorrow. He stepped out into the thick summer heat and headed home, not knowing he'd be one of the last people to ever see her alive. The first few hours went smoothly. A trucker bought coffee and a pack of Marlboros at 10:47. A couple on a road trip filled up and grabbed snacks around 11:13. An off-duty cop stopped by for a Gatorade at 11:38. He later told investigators Tessa seemed perfectly normal, cheerful even. She'd asked how his daughter's soccer season was going. By midnight, the place settled into that deep quiet only a rural gas station knows. Tessa took advantage of the lull to restock shelves, straightening candy racks, wiping down the soda fountain, humming along to Alanis Morissette on the radio. At 11:43 p.m., the security camera above the register caught her kneeling in front of the chip display, rearranging bags of Doritos and Lay's. At 12:04 a.m., she was behind the register, flipping through a magazine, and then at 12:16 a.m., the camera captured something investigators would study for decades. Tessa looked up toward the front door. Her expression shifted. Not fear, not surprise, recognition. She smiled, a small, polite smile. The kind you give someone you know, someone you trust. She said something. Though the camera had no audio, her relaxed posture said enough. She stepped out from behind the counter and walked toward the door, disappearing from the camera's view. At 12:19 a.m., she reappeared for just a moment, standing near the entrance, talking to someone still off screen. You could see the side of her face. She was nodding, calm, comfortable. Then she reached for the door handle. At 12:20 a.m., she walked out of the frame. She never walked back into it. The next time the camera recorded any movement was at 6:04 a.m., when the morning shift worker, Danny Hughes, pushed open the front door. He knew something was wrong the second he stepped inside. The register was closed but not locked. The lights were still on. The coffee pot was almost empty, burnt to the bottom. The radio hummed softly behind the counter. But Tessa, she was nowhere. "Tessa?" Danny called out. "You in the bathroom?" Silence. He checked the restroom, the back room, the storage closet, every corner of the small building. Nothing. When he stepped outside and circled around, his stomach dropped. Tessa's car, her old 1989 Honda Accord, sat parked in the employee spot exactly where she always left it. That's when the panic hit. He rushed back inside, grabbed the phone, and dialed Bill Peterson. "Bill, it's Danny." "Something's wrong. Tessa's not here, but her car is. The place is wide open. The coffee's burning." Bill didn't hesitate. "Call 911, right now." By 6:30 a.m., St. Clair County deputies were already at the scene. By 7 a.m., the parking lot was wrapped in crime scene tape. By 8 a.m., news vans rolled in, because by then everybody understood it was happening again. Sharon Lewis got the knock at 7:42 a.m. She'd been getting ready for work when she opened the door to see a uniformed deputy standing on her porch. "Mrs. Lewis," he said gently, "I'm Deputy Harmon. It's about your daughter." Tessa Sharon's legs buckled. She had to grab the door frame just to stay upright. No, not my baby. Please, God, not my baby." The investigation erupted instantly. And this time, for the first time, they had something to work with. Not much, but more than they'd ever had with Illa or Nora. The security footage became the centerpiece. The FBI's behavioral analysis unit went through it frame by frame, enhancing, stabilizing, analyzing every shadow. Who was Tessa smiling at 12:16 a.m.? Who did she walk toward so calmly? The camera never caught the full figure, just a sliver of an arm, a faint shadow, someone standing just outside the door. Whether they knew the camera's blind spot or simply stood in the wrong place at the right time, nobody could say. Investigators tracked down every customer who'd been there that night. The trucker, cleared. The road trip couple, cleared. The off-duty cop, cleared. They pulled credit card records from the pumps between midnight and 12:30 a.m., interviewed every single owner, and cleared every one of them too. Forensics dusted every surface, doors, counters, shelves. They collected fibers, hair samples, footprints. But with hundreds of people passing through each week, the contamination was overwhelming. Just the front door alone held 37 different fingerprints. Still, among all that noise, there was one thing, one tiny thing, They didn't realize would change everything. A partial DNA profile on the outside door handle. It was degraded, incomplete, useless by 1995 standards. But it was preserved, stored, waiting for the future to catch up. On August 25th, the FBI officially took over the case. Special Agent Monica Voss stood before reporters outside the sheriff's office. We are treating the disappearances of Layla Wilson, Nora Scott, and Tessa Lewis as connected. We believe one individual is responsible, and we are devoting every resource to finding him. The county froze. 3 young women, 7 years, same region, same eerie vanishings. Parents pulled their daughters off night shifts. Gas stations banned solo overnight workers. Churches held safety workshops. Stores sold out of deadbolts. Fear wrapped itself around the community like a heavy blanket. Town hall meetings overflowed. People wanted answers, desperately. How could someone take 3 women without a struggle, without a scream, without a single solid clue? Sheriff Bill Craddock stood at one meeting looking exhausted, almost hollow. "We are doing everything we can," he said, voice cracking, "but we need help. If you saw anything at all, near Peterson's gas station on August 22nd, please come forward." Hundreds of tips flooded in. Everyone was checked. Everyone led nowhere. The task force dug back through old notes, timelines, maps, patterns, anything that might connect the dots. And one name kept showing up in the background. Tommy Brennan, a regular at Murphy's Diner in 1988, a volunteer searcher for Nora Scott in 1990, and according to Bill Peterson, a frequent customer at the gas station, always stopping in for coffee and cigarettes. On August 28th, investigators knocked on Tommy Brennan's door for the 3rd time in 7 years. "Tommy, we need to ask you a few follow-up questions." He didn't flinch. He welcomed them inside, poured everyone a glass of sweet tea, and settled at the kitchen table with a worried look on his face. "This is just terrible," he said, shaking his head. 3 girls. I can't imagine what their families are going through." One of the detectives leaned forward. "Do you remember being at Peterson's gas station on the night of August 22nd? Tommy paused, thinking. "I might have stopped there earlier that week, but not that night. I was home with my wife. We watched Frasier and went to bed around 11. From the next room, his wife chimed in. "That's right. He was here all night." Investigators asked a few more questions. Tommy answered calmly, politely, like someone who genuinely wanted to help. He even offered to take a polygraph. "Whatever you need," he said. "I just want you to catch this guy." But the polygraph never happened. There wasn't enough reason to push for one. After all, Tommy Brennan was the picture of a good neighbor, a volunteer firefighter, dependable, well-liked, the sort of man who'd give you the shirt off his back. Nothing about him fit the image of a predator, so investigators thanked him and left. They wouldn't return for another 29 years. By the end of 1995, the case had gone cold. The FBI task force was reassigned. News coverage faded away, and the families were left with nothing but grief and questions that kept them awake at night. Sharon Lewis kept Tessa's room exactly the way she left it. Sketchbooks stacked neatly on her desk. A University of Alabama brochure pinned to her corkboard. It was like time had stopped inside those walls. 2 months after her daughter vanished, Sharon visited Peterson's gas station. She stood in the parking lot and sobbed so hard she threw up. She never went back. Meanwhile, the 3 families, the Wilsons, the Scotts, and the Lewises, formed their own support group. Once a month, they gathered at Pell City Baptist Church, sitting in a circle, holding hands, sharing the kind of pain only they could understand. They became each other's lifeline. Because how could anyone else truly grasp what it felt like to have a daughter disappear without a trace? And the man responsible? He simply returned to his everyday life. He coached Little League, volunteered at the fire station, sat in church on Sundays like nothing had ever happened. After Tessa, he'd made a decision. The FBI's involvement rattled him. Too much attention, too much risk. So he stopped. And for nearly 30 years, Thomas Brennan lived in plain sight, carrying the weight of 3 murders with a chilling sense of satisfaction. Then, nothing. No more disappearances. No more late-night panic. The storm just ended, leaving behind a long, painful quiet. The years rolled by, 1996, 1997, 2000, and the county slowly drifted back to normal life. People married, had children, built homes. Friday night football games filled the stands again. Murphy's Diner kept serving the best biscuits and gravy in town. Even Peterson's gas station reopened under new management, though the shadow of what happened there never completely disappeared. By early 1996, the FBI officially shut down the task force. There were no leads left to chase. Everything had gone cold. The case files, boxes and boxes of interviews, photographs, reports, and dead-end tips, were shelved in the sheriff's evidence room, collecting dust. Layla Wilson, Nora Scott, Tessa Lewis, three names that would haunt St. Clair County for generations. Sheriff Bill Craddock retired in 1998. The man looked like he'd aged a decade in just a few years. The weight of those unsolved cases had worn him down. At his retirement party, he gave a short speech that ended in an emotional apology. "I'm sorry," he said, voice shaking. "I'm sorry we couldn't bring those girls home. I'm sorry we couldn't give their families peace. That failure will follow me to my grave." 6 months later, he moved to Florida. Some folks said Sheriff Craddock just couldn't stand driving past the places where those young women vanished. Constant reminders of the monster he never managed to catch. But the families? They didn't have the luxury of leaving. Their pain stayed right there with them. Robert and Diane Wilson remained in St. Clair County. Layla's room stayed exactly as she left it, a quiet shrine to an 18-year-old who would never grow older. Every October 14th, they held a candlelight vigil at Murphy's Diner. Some years 100 people gathered, some years just a handful, but the Wilsons never missed one. James and Linda Scott lasted 8 more years on their ranch before the memories became too heavy to bear. In 2003, they finally sold the place. Every time Linda looked toward Old Mill Access Road, she saw that red Ford pickup sitting empty. Every time James walked the fence line, he swore he could still hear himself shouting Nora's name into the wind. They moved to Gadsden, close enough to remember, far enough to breathe. Nora's fiancé, Derek Pullman, never remarried. He tried dating, but nothing ever felt right. How could it? The woman he planned to spend his life with had been taken just 3 weeks after he proposed. Some wounds don't heal, they just harden into scars. He kept her engagement ring in a wooden box on his nightstand. On quiet nights, he'd open it, stare at the small diamond, and remember the way Nora's eyes sparkled when he placed it on her finger. Sharon Lewis, Tessa's mother, buried herself in work. Double shifts turned into triple shifts, anything to avoid the silence waiting for her at home, where Tessa's room sat like a sealed-off tomb. Her younger daughter, Amy, graduated in 2001 and moved to Atlanta almost immediately. She loved her mother deeply, but staying in St. Clair County felt suffocating. The grief hung too heavy in the air. Sharon understood. She didn't blame her. Through all the years, the Wilsons, the Scotts, and the Lewises kept meeting once a month. Their little group became a lifeline. They'd gather in the church basement, drink bad coffee, and talk. Not about how their daughters disappeared, but how they lived. "Ela used to sing in the shower," Diane Wilson said one evening, smiling through her tears. "Loudest, most off-key singing you've ever heard. But she didn't care. She just belted it out." The group laughed, and for a moment it felt good to remember joy instead of heartache. But beneath every story, every smile, was the same aching question. By the mid-2000s, St. Clair County had built up its own dark folklore. Newcomers whispered about the St. Clair Spectre, a phantom predator who prowled the county in the late 80s and early 90s, taking young women and vanishing without a trace. Some locals believed he'd died, maybe a heart attack, maybe an accident. Others thought he'd moved away and continued his crimes somewhere else. Still others believed he might be sitting in prison for an unrelated crime, his awful secret buried with him. But no one knew, and that uncertainty was its own kind of torment. In 2010, St. Clair County elected a new sheriff, Marcus Haywood, a Birmingham native who'd spent 15 years working homicide before seeking what he hoped would be a quieter job. He got anything but quiet. One of his first decisions was to reopen the old cold case files. He spent weeks poring over every report, every photo, every dead-end lead. "These women deserve better," he told his deputies. "Their families deserve better. I don't care if it's been 15 years, we're taking another look." And this time he had something the original investigators didn't: advances in DNA technology. Sheriff Haywood ordered every piece of forensic evidence from all three disappearances to be retested by the Alabama Department of Forensic Sciences. Months passed. Then in early 2011, the results came back. The DNA taken from the door handle at Peterson's gas station, the sample connected to Tessa Lewis, had finally been successfully re-extracted and profiled. It wasn't perfect. It was partial, damaged, but it was usable. Sheriff Haywood sent the newly recovered DNA profile straight to CODIS, the FBI's enormous DNA database filled with profiles from convicted offenders across the country. No match. He tried again using familial DNA searching, a newer method that could identify close relatives of a suspect, even if the suspect himself wasn't in the system. Still nothing. The DNA was good, just not tied to anyone on record. And that left only two real possibilities. Either the man behind these disappearances had never been arrested for anything serious, or he committed his crimes before DNA collection became routine. It was progress, but progress without direction. Still, Haywood didn't quit. He re-interviewed old witnesses, tracked down people who'd moved 3 states away, chased leads that detectives had scratched out in the 90s, and every trail ended in the same place: nowhere. By 2015, even the seasoned sheriff could feel that familiar weight settling on his shoulders, the weight of failure. How do you solve a case with no witnesses, no fresh evidence, and a suspect who'd vanished like mist? Then in 2018, the department hired a new detective, Sheriff Haywood's own son, Marcus Haywood Jr. Fresh out of the academy, full of energy, and eager to make his mark, he sat across the dinner table one night and said, "Dad, let me take a look at the Wilson Scott Lewis cases." "Fresh eyes. Maybe I'll see something you didn't." The sheriff wanted to say no. He knew those cases could consume a person, but he also knew his boy had a point. Someone new might see what everyone else had missed. "All right," he finally said, "but I'm warning you, those cases will eat you alive if you let them." Detective Marcus Haywood Jr., Mark, to keep things simple, threw himself into the work. He built timelines, pinned maps to the walls, cross-checked every name that appeared in all 3 files, and one name kept resurfacing: Tommy Brennan. Not as a suspect, Tommy had been cleared several times, but as a presence, a regular at Murphy's Diner, a volunteer in Nora's search, a familiar customer at Peterson's gas station. Mark brought it up to his father. "Dad, this guy, Tommy Brennan, he's tied to all 3 cases." "We looked at him," the sheriff reminded him. "He had alibis." His wife backed him. "He cooperated every time. There's nothing there." "I know," Mark said slowly. "It just feels strange." He knew all 3 victims. He was around during each disappearance. "A lot of people were around," his father replied. "It's a small county. Folks cross paths. That's not evidence," Mark nodded. He knew his dad was right. But that itch, the one he couldn't quite scratch, never stopped. He kept digging. By 2020, the cases were old enough to vote. Diane Wilson was in her 70s. Robert had passed away in 2017, never knowing what happened to his daughter. Linda Scott's health was fading. Sharon Lewis, still working, still waiting, was 61. The candlelight vigils continued. The little support group kept meeting. But hope was growing thin. "I just want to know before I die," Diane Wilson whispered at the 2021 vigil. "I just want to know where my baby is." Detective Mark Haywood stood quietly at the back of the crowd that night, listening. The grief in that room settled on him like lead. He made himself a promise. "Now, before we get to the moment everything changes, I need you to do one thing for me. If you want to see how this case finally gets solved, after 30 long years, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. These families waited decades for answers, and you're about to learn how cutting-edge science finally uncovered a hidden truth. And hey, drop a comment too. What's the weather like where you are today? Late in 2022, Mark attended a forensic science conference in Montgomery. One seminar covered investigative genetic genealogy, the very same technique that helped catch the Golden State Killer back in 2018. It was a game changer. And Mark realized right then and there that this might be the key to solving the mysteries that had haunted St. Clair County for 3 decades. He returned home with a plan, and in 2023, everything changed. In February of that year, Detective Mark Haywood walked into his father's office carrying a laptop and a thick folder bursting with documents. "Dad," Mark said, stepping into the office with a laptop under one arm and a thick folder under the other, "I need you to approve a budget request." The sheriff looked up from his paperwork. "For what?" "Investigative genetic genealogy," Mark answered. "I want to send the DNA from Peterson's gas station to a specialty lab and bring in a genealogy team." Sheriff Haywood leaned back in his chair with a sigh. "Mark, we've tried everything with that DNA. It didn't match anyone in CODIS. Familial searching went nowhere." "That's because we were looking in the wrong database," Mark said, opening his laptop. "CODIS only has DNA from convicted criminals. But public genealogy sites, millions of people upload their DNA voluntarily, trying to trace their roots, find relatives, build family trees." The sheriff folded his arms, listening. "Go on." "We upload the suspect's profile to those databases," Mark explained. "If any of his relatives, even distant cousins, have taken one of those ancestry tests, we'll get a hit. Then the genealogists build out family trees, narrow things down, and we identify men who match the age, location, and timeline." The sheriff was silent for a long moment. "And how much will this cost us?" "15,000, Mark said. "That covers the lab work and the genealogy team." The sheriff let out a low whistle. "That's a lot of money for a 30-year-old case with no guarantees." "I know," Mark said softly. "But Dad, think about those families. Think about Diane Wilson standing at that vigil every year, praying for answers. Think about Sharon Lewis, working herself to the bone just to keep going. Don't they deserve one more real shot at the truth?" Sheriff Haywood looked at his son, really looked, and saw the same fire he himself had carried all those years ago when he reopened the files. "All right," he said finally. "Submit the request. I'll get it approved." By March 2023, the DNA sample was on its way to Aram Labs in Texas, a cutting-edge forensic facility that specialized in genetic genealogy. Their team began the painstaking work of uploading the profile to public databases and digging for relatives. Weeks went by, then months. Mark checked his email so often he practically wore out his inbox. Every morning, every afternoon, nothing. By November, hope was starting to slip away. Maybe the suspect didn't have any relatives in the database. Maybe this was just another promising lead destined to die on the vine. And then, December 4th, 2023, 2:17 p.m., an email appeared. Subject, St. Clair County case. Significant development. Mark's hands trembled as he clicked it open. "Detective Haywood, we have identified multiple genetic matches in the GED match database. The DNA profile you submitted shares markers with at least 6 individuals who have uploaded their ancestry results. Based on the shared centimorgans, we estimate these individuals are 3rd to 5th cousins of your suspect. We are now building family trees to identify common ancestors and narrow down the suspect pool. Expect an update within 2 weeks." Mark shot up from his desk so fast that his chair slammed into the wall behind him. "Dad," he called, sprinting down the hallway. "We got a hit." The next 2 weeks dragged on like 2 months. The genealogy team worked non-stop, building massive family trees stretching back generations. They traced branches through old census records, marriage certificates, military drafts, land deeds. They followed families who'd moved to Alabama in the early 1900s. Slowly, painstakingly, the suspect pool started to shrink. On December 18th, 2023, another email arrived. "Detective Haywood, we have narrowed the suspect pool to 4 individuals who fit the genetic profile and geographic parameters. All 4 are male, age 55 to 70, and have lived in or near St. Clair County for the past 40 years. Attachment, candidate list." Mark downloaded the attachment with shaking hands. 4 names. He recognized 3 of them, men who had brushed against the original investigations but never raised real suspicion. And then he saw the 4th. Mark felt his stomach drop straight through the floor. Tommy Brennan, the friendly volunteer firefighter, the Little League coach, the man who'd been interviewed 3 times over 3 decades and cleared every single time, the man who'd helped search for Layla, the man who comforted the Scotts, the man no one had ever suspected. The man who'd been a familiar face at Peterson's gas station, the helpful volunteer during searches, the customer everyone recognized, that same Tommy Brennan. Mark pulled Brennan's file again, this time with new eyes. In 1988, Tommy was 40. Today he was 62. Married, no kids, longtime resident of Oakwood Drive in Pell City. Not a single arrest on record, not even a traffic citation. And there they were again, the alibis. For October 14th, 1988, home with his wife. For June 3rd, 1990, home with his wife. For August 22nd, 1995, home with his wife. Mark stared at those reports. 3 cases, 3 statements. One person vouching for him every single time. But what if she wasn't telling the truth? Or worse, what if she didn't even know? People fall asleep on the sofa. People assume their spouse is still in the house. People trust routines. And someone like Tommy Brennan could have used all of that to his advantage. Mark kept digging. He ran a full background check, combed through property records, work history, volunteer logs, old community event photos, anything that might reveal a crack. But Tommy's life looked spotless. Too spotless. On January 9th, 2024, he presented everything to Sheriff Haywood and the county prosecutor. The genealogy team put Brennan at the top of the list, Mark explained, but we still need a direct DNA sample. Without it, we can't get a warrant. The prosecutor leaned forward. Can we get a judge to sign one now? Mark shook his head. Not yet. DNA genealogy narrows the field, but it's not probable cause. We need something concrete. So what's the plan? Sheriff Haywood asked. Surveillance, Mark replied. We watch him. When he tosses something with his DNA on it, we take it. Coffee cup, cigarette butt, anything. Once we get a match, we move. The sheriff didn't hesitate. All right. Start immediately. And for the next 8 weeks, Mark shadowed Tommy Brennan's every move. He watched him leave for work at precisely 7:15 a.m. Watched him stop at the same coffee shop each Tuesday and Thursday. Watched him sit in the same pew every Sunday, shaking hands and smiling warmly at everyone who passed. To the outside world, Tommy Brennan looked like the kind of man you'd trust with your kids. Salt of the earth. A neighbor you'd lend your spare house key to. But Mark could feel the truth pressing at the edges. On March 12th, 2024, it finally happened. Tommy stopped at a McDonald's along Highway 231. He bought a large coffee, sat alone with a newspaper for 20 minutes, then tossed the cup into the trash and walked out. Mark waited until Tommy drove away. Then he walked inside, slipped on latex gloves, pulled the cup from the bin, and sealed it in an evidence bag. The forensics lab received it the next morning. On April 3rd, 2024, the results came in. The DNA on that coffee cup was identical to the DNA left on the door handle at Peterson's gas station in 1995. After 36 years, they finally had him. An emergency meeting was called. Sheriff Haywood didn't sugarcoat it. We've got a confirmed DNA hit, he announced. Tommy Brennan is responsible for the murders of Layla Wilson, Nora Scott, and Tessa Lewis. Silence fell over the room. My God, the prosecutor whispered. It was him. All this time on April 18th, 2024, a judge signed the arrest warrant. Plans were made to take Brennan into custody at dawn on May 7th, early enough to catch him off guard, late enough to avoid alarming neighbors. The night before the arrest, Mark parked outside the Wilson family home. He didn't go up to the door. He just sat quietly thinking about Diane Wilson, how she had waited more than 3 decades to learn what happened to her daughter. At 6:30 a.m. on May 7th, Mark joined the tactical team gathering 2 blocks from Oakwood Drive. You ready? Sheriff Haywood asked. Mark nodded. Let's bring this monster in. Because when detectives finally uncovered the truth, even they struggled to believe it. The man who had fooled an entire community for decades was finally about to face justice. And what they would soon discover on his property confirmed the darkest fears imaginable. May 7th, 2024 to 6:47 a.m. 3 unmarked patrol vehicles rolled quietly down Oakwood Drive. Most houses were still dark, curtains closed. The neighborhood was still asleep, unaware that everything was about to change. Detective Mark Haywood sat in the lead vehicle, his heart pounding. This was the moment three families had been praying for since 1988. The convoy slowed to a stop in front of 1847 Oakwood Drive, a simple ranch-style home with beige siding, black shutters, a neat lawn, a weathered red pickup in the driveway, and wind chimes tapping softly in the morning breeze. It looked like any house in America. Ordinary, unremarkable, deceptively peaceful. 6 officers stepped out, along with Sheriff Haywood and Mark. Tactical vests on, 2 officers carried battering rams, though everyone hoped the door wouldn't need to be forced. Mark walked to the front with the arrest warrant tucked inside his jacket, his father beside him. Before he could knock, the door opened. Thomas Allen Brennan stood in the doorway, gray sweatpants, a faded crimson Alabama t-shirt, reading glasses perched on his forehead. He looked mildly confused, but not afraid, not shocked. "Can I help you, officers?" he asked calmly. Mark met his eyes. "Thomas Brennan, you're under arrest for the murders of Layla Wilson, Nora Scott, and Tessa Lewis." For the briefest instant, less than a heartbeat, something passed across Tommy's face. Not horror, not disbelief, but recognition, as if he'd always known this day might come. "You have the right to remain silent," Mark continued, stepping forward. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Tommy didn't fight. He simply turned, placed his hands behind his back, and allowed Mark to cuff him. The metallic click echoed through the quiet street. Across the road, 74-year-old Mrs. Patricia Dunlap opened her front door in her bathrobe. She spotted Tommy in handcuffs and let out a gasp. "What's going on?" "Tommy, what happened?" A few houses down, Alan Ruiz stepped outside with his morning coffee. He froze in mid-sip. "That's Tommy," he whispered. "No way. There's got to be a mistake." Neighbors who had known him for years stared wide-eyed, struggling to make sense of what they were witnessing. Inside the Brennan home, Tommy's wife Linda appeared in the hallway, her face drained of color. "Tommy," she whispered. "Tommy, what's happening?" He didn't answer, didn't look at her, didn't speak a single word. Sheriff Haywood stepped forward. "Mrs. Brennan, we have a warrant to search the property. I'm going to need you to step outside." Linda stood frozen, staring at her husband. "Tommy, tell them they're wrong. Tell them it's a mistake." He said nothing. By 7:30 a.m., Tommy was in the back of a patrol car headed toward the St. Clair County Jail. News vans already crowded Oakwood Drive as neighbors gathered in small clusters, whispering in disbelief. "I've known him for 15 years, Alan Ruiz told a reporter. "He's the nicest man I've ever met. He organized the 4th of July cookout every year. He shoveled driveways in the winter. He coached Little League. There's no way." But while the community struggled to process the unthinkable, investigators were already uncovering the truth. The search began at 8:01 a.m. Forensic teams worked through every inch of the home. Computers, journals, old photographs. They lifted floorboards, searched the attic, examined the garage. Then they moved to the backyard. Brennan's property stretched across 2 heavily wooded acres, tall pines and oaks forming a natural wall of shadows. A rusted chain-link fence marked the rear boundary. At 10:42 a.m., a cadaver dog named Sadie alerted near a cluster of trees about 150 feet behind the home. "We've got something," the handler radioed. Forensic anthropologists arrived and began a careful excavation. By 2 p.m., they uncovered the first set of remains. By 4 p.m., the second. By 6 p.m., the third. 3 shallow graves, 3 victims, all buried for decades, just a short walk from where their families had spent years grieving, searching, hoping, praying for answers, hidden in plain sight. And inside the house, investigators found something even more devastating. In a locked filing cabinet inside Tommy Brennan's basement office, investigators found a collection of items that made even the most seasoned detectives go still. A silver bracelet engraved LW, the graduation gift Layla Wilson had received from her parents. A turquoise ring that had belonged to Nora Scott, the ring Derek gave her for her 21st birthday, the one she never took off. A sketchbook filled with charcoal drawings. Tessa Lewis's portfolio, the one she'd been preparing for her college application. These weren't random objects. They were trophies, souvenirs, Proof that Tommy Brennan hadn't just taken these young women's lives. He had kept pieces of them, preserved the memories like sinister keepsakes. And then came the worst discovery. 3 journals, each one filled with neat, methodical handwriting. Dates, locations, descriptions, a cold, calculated record of everything he had done. Opportunity presented itself. No complications. Execution flawless. Timing more difficult but manageable. Results satisfactory. Final acquisition. Risk increasing. Must cease activity. He wrote about these young women as if they were tasks, projects completed and filed away. There was no guilt, no reflection, no trace of humanity. That evening, 8 p.m., May 7th, 2024. Sheriff Marcus Haywood stood behind a podium inside the St. Clair County Courthouse. The room overflowed with reporters, residents, and, most importantly, the families of Layla, Nora, and Tessa. His voice was steady. His eyes were not. Today, he announced, we arrested Thomas Allen Brennan, age 62, for the murders of Layla Wilson, Nora Scott, and Tessa Lewis. DNA evidence conclusively links him to all 3 cases. During a search of his property, we recovered the remains of all 3 victims, as well as personal items belonging to them. The reaction was immediate. Gasps, sobs, camera shutters firing. In the front row, Diane Wilson held a framed picture of Layla. Tears streamed down her cheeks. Not from grief this time, but from something closer to peace. "We found her," she whispered. "We finally found her." Linda and James Scott held each other tightly. The strain of decades was etched into every line on James's face as he buried his head against his wife's shoulder. At the back of the room, Sharon Lewis wrapped her arms around her daughter Amy. They cried together, holding on as if afraid the moment might slip away. "For Tessa," Sharon whispered. Sheriff Haywood continued, "Thomas Brennan has been charged with 3 counts of capital murder. He is being held without bond. The investigation remains ongoing, but let me be clear. Justice is finally coming for Layla, Nora, and Tessa." Outside, the community was in shock. Tommy Brennan, the man who grilled burgers at the 4th of July cookout, who shoveled snow for his elderly neighbors, who hugged Nora's mother in church and told her, "We'll find her," had been the monster they were searching for all along. And people were asking the same question. The answer was as chilling as everything else about him. Inside an interrogation room at the St. Clair County Jail, Thomas Brennan sat calmly, hands folded on the metal table. He had waived his right to an attorney. He wanted to talk. Detective Mark Haywood and Sheriff Marcus Haywood sat across from him. A digital recorder clicked quietly between them. "Tommy," Mark began, "we found them. All 3. We have your DNA. We have your journals. We have the items you kept. There's no point denying it." Tommy lifted his eyes. His face was blank. "I'm not denying anything," he said softly. The room went still. "You want to confess?" Sheriff Haywood asked. A small shrug. "What's the point in lying now?" "You've already got everything you need," Mark leaned in. "Why did you do it, Tommy?" "Why those girls?" Tommy tilted his head as if the question puzzled him. "Why?" he repeated. "Because I could." No emotion, no hesitation. Just cold, mechanical truth. "They were opportunities," he continued. "Wrong place, wrong time. Alone. Vulnerable. I didn't plan it months ahead. I just saw the moment and took it." Mark's jaw tightened. Layla Wilson was 18 years old. She had her whole life ahead of her. "I know," Tommy replied. "Nora Scott was about to get married." "I know. Tessa Lewis was saving money for college." Again, no change in his face, no flicker of emotion. "I know." Sheriff Haywood slammed his hand on the table. "And you feel nothing? No guilt? No shame?" Tommy met his eyes without flinching. "No." It was the sort of cold, flat response that sends a chill through even experienced investigators. Classic psychopathy. No empathy, no remorse. Just a man who saw people as tools to use and throw away. Mark steadied himself. "Why did you stop after 1995? For the first time, Tommy's expression shifted just a little. A faint, unsettling smile appeared. "Because I'm not stupid," he said. "After the 3rd one, the FBI got involved. They were talking about task forces, serial predators. I knew if I kept going, I'd eventually slip up. So I stopped. Just like that? Mark asked. Just like that, Tommy answered. I proved to myself I could do it 3 times. Got away with it every time. That was enough. I didn't need to be greedy. It hit Mark like a punch to the chest. Tommy had treated murder like a weekend hobby, something he picked up, perfected, and then casually walked away from. Sheriff Haywood leaned forward. What about the searches? You helped to look for Illa. You comforted Nora's family. You acted like you cared. Tommy shrugged as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Of course I did. That's what innocent people do, right? They help. They show concern. If I'd kept my distance, that would have raised suspicion. But by showing up, by being part of the community effort, I looked like everybody else. Just another neighbor doing his part. And that was the darkest truth of all. Predators don't always hide in the shadows. Sometimes they stand in the middle of the crowd, flashlight in hand, pretending to search for the very people they've harmed. Tommy Brennan had weaponized his reputation. He was the helpful guy, the friendly volunteer firefighter, the one who coached Little League and waved at neighbors across the grocery aisle. People trusted him, and that trust became the perfect hiding place. Illa knew him. She'd poured him coffee at the diner dozens of times. When he approached her car that night, she probably smiled, thinking nothing of it. Nora recognized him instantly when his truck rolled up beside hers on that lonely country road. Why wouldn't she? He was at every fundraiser, every fair, every church supper. Tessa had rung up his gas station snacks more times than she could count. When he walked through the door at 12:16 a.m., she likely greeted him with the same routine friendliness she showed every regular customer. Their comfort around him was exactly what he relied on. Forensic psychologist Dr. Raymond Ortiz evaluated Tommy, and his report, released May 15th, was chilling. Tommy showed every hallmark of an organized offender: methodical, charming, socially competent, yet utterly hollow inside. No empathy, no remorse. People were objects, nothing more. But there was something even worse. Tommy didn't just enjoy the act itself. He enjoyed everything after. The trophies, the journals, the attention, the family's suffering, the thrill of walking through town knowing what he'd done, and knowing no one suspected a thing. For 36 years, he'd carried that secret while mowing his lawn, cheering at games, and sitting in the church pews. All while 3 young women lay buried just steps from his back door. When news of Tommy's confession reached the families, the reactions were heartbreaking. Diane Wilson felt both relief and a deep, burning anger. "I'm glad we know," she whispered, "but I'll never understand how someone can be so evil." James Scott could only shake his head. "All those years we thought it was a stranger passing through, and it was someone we knew. Someone we trusted." Sharon Lewis struggled the most to make sense of it all. "Tessa knew him," she whispered. "She probably smiled at him that night. She thought she was safe, and that was the cruelest truth of all." These young women didn't die because they were careless or naive. They died because someone they trusted, a man who blended in like any other neighbor, hid a monster behind a friendly smile. In small-town America, where trust is practically part of the local currency, a betrayal like that leaves a deep and lasting scar. On May 20th, 2024, the St. Clair County District Attorney's Office formally charged Thomas Allen Brennan with 3 counts of capital murder. Under Alabama law, that left only 2 possible sentences: life without parole or death. District Attorney Patricia Monroe made the state's position clear. "These were cold, calculated murders," she said at a press conference. "Mr. Brennan showed no remorse. He treated human lives like they were disposable. He deserves the ultimate punishment." Tommy Brennan's arraignment took place on May 23rd. He appeared on a video screen from the county jail, dressed in an orange jumpsuit, expression hollow. When the judge asked for his plea, his attorney spoke for him. Not guilty. The trial was set for March 2025, a date legal experts predicted would kick off one of the most high-profile trials Alabama had ever seen. The evidence was airtight: DNA, physical items, his own recorded confession, and the victim's remains finally recovered and identified through dental records. His guilt wasn't up for debate. The only question left was what sentence a jury would choose. But for the families, the court proceedings were almost secondary. What mattered, the thing they'd been denied for decades, was closure. On June 8, 2024, after 36 long years, Layla Wilson's remains were released to her family. A funeral service was held at Pell City Baptist Church, the same church where countless vigils had been held for her over the years. Diane Wilson stood at the pulpit holding a framed photo of Layla. Tears slid down her cheeks. "Layla was sunshine," she said gently. "She lit up every room she walked into. And for 36 years, I didn't know where she was. I didn't know if she suffered. I didn't know if she was alone. But now I know. And I can finally let her rest." More than 300 people filled the church. Friends, relatives, neighbors, and even strangers who had followed the case for years. Layla was laid to rest in Pell City Memorial Gardens. Her headstone read, "2 weeks later, the community gathered again for Nora Scott's funeral." Her former fiancé, Derek Pullman, now 54, graying and visibly worn from decades of grief, helped carry her casket. Before it was closed, he gently set the engagement ring he'd saved for 34 years inside. "I never stopped looking for you," he whispered. "I never gave up." Tessa Lewis was buried on July 1st, 2024. Her sister Amy delivered the eulogy. "Tessa wasn't just my sister," she said. "She was my protector, my best friend, my hero." For 29 years, her name has been followed by a question mark. Where is Tessa? What happened to Tessa? But now her name has a period. Tessa Lewis, artist, dreamer, beloved daughter and sister. That's her legacy. Not the way she died, but the way she lived. Tessa's mother, Sharon, planted a magnolia tree in her memory outside the family home. Every year on Tessa's birthday, she sits beneath it and talks to her daughter. "I can finally sleep," Sharon said in an interview months later. "For the first time in almost 3 decades, I don't wake up wondering where my baby is. I know where she is, and I know who took her. That's not happiness, but it's peace." The people of St. Clair County were left grappling with a harsh reality. How had they missed it? How had a predator lived among them for so long? Counseling services filled up. Churches hosted healing nights. Town halls held meeting after meeting to talk about the collective trauma. "We trusted him," one resident said. "We let our kids around him. How do we trust anyone again?" It would take years for the town to mend. But even in their grief, they felt deep gratitude, especially for Detective Mark Haywood, whose determination ensured the case was never forgotten. There was gratitude, deep, genuine gratitude, for the technology that finally delivered justice, and gratitude for the closure so many families believed they would never receive. At a community vigil on August 22nd, the anniversary of Tessa Lewis's disappearance, Sheriff Marcus Haywood spoke to a crowd holding candles in the warm evening air. "These families waited 36 years for answers," he said. "They endured pain most of us can't even imagine. They never gave up hope. And while we can't bring Layla, Nora, and Tessa back, we can honor their memories by making sure their killer faces justice. Technology gave us the tools, but these families, their strength, their perseverance, they gave us the purpose." Applause surged through the crowd. Diane Wilson, Linda Scott, and Sharon Lewis stood side by side, arms linked, tears shining in their eyes. They had survived the unthinkable. Now at last, they could begin the long process of healing. Before we wrap up, I need to ask you something. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Tap like, share this video with someone who cares about justice and true crime. These stories matter. These families matter. And your support helps me keep telling them. Thank you for being here. 36 years. That's how long it took to solve the murders of Layla Wilson, Nora Scott, and Tessa Lewis. 36 years of searching, waiting, hoping, grieving. But those 36 years proved something powerful. And the breakthroughs in forensic genealogy that solved this case? They're not limited to St. Clair County. All across America, cold cases once thought impossible to solve are finally being cracked wide open. The Golden State Killer, the Bear Brook murders, countless Jane and John Does finally identified and brought home. DNA doesn't lie, and thanks to modern technology, it doesn't fade away. But technology alone didn't solve this one. It took Detective Mark Haywood refusing to give up. It took families who demanded answers year after year. It took a community that never forgot. There's another lesson here, one that's harder to accept. Trust is a cornerstone of small communities. It's what lets neighbors rely on each other. But blind trust can be dangerous. Predators know how to use it. They step into roles of respect. They volunteer. They coach. They charm. They hide the darkest intentions behind the brightest smiles. Tommy Brennan wasn't some stranger lurking at the edge of town. He was a helper, a neighbor, a man people felt safe around. And that's exactly what made him so dangerous. We have to be watchful, but not fearful, trusting, but not naive. It's a delicate balance, but it matters. As we close this chapter, I want you to hold on to something important. Layla Wilson, Nora Scott, and Tessa Lewis were not just victims. They were daughters who made their parents laugh, sisters whose absence left an ache beyond words, young women with dreams, real, beautiful dreams, taken far too soon. Ela wanted to be a nurse, to help people. Nora dreamed of marrying the love of her life and raising a family on the land she grew up on. Tessa wanted to study graphic design and create meaningful art. Those dreams didn't vanish. They live on, in memories, in stories, in the magnolia tree planted for Tessa, in every vigil held in their honor. Their families carried grief that could have crushed anyone else. For decades they endured birthdays, holidays, and anniversaries with empty chairs. But they never stopped fighting. They never let the world forget. That's the real story, not the man who took their lives, but the families who preserved their names. Thomas Brennan will stand trial in 2025. He'll likely spend the rest of his life behind bars, or he'll face execution. Either way, his name will fade away, just another dark footnote. But Ella, Nora, and Tessa, their names will endure. Their lives will be remembered. Their stories will matter. In St. Clair County, Alabama, the secrets are finally buried. The community has begun to heal. The nightmare is over. But the memories of three young women, full of promise, full of light, will live on forever. Rest in peace, Ella. Rest in peace, Nora. Rest in peace, Tessa. You're finally home.